Hi guys. So you're watching this because you're in a study hall today on Wednesday, and so I have prepared for you the lesson that I would have given you if we were in class today. So here's your agenda that would normally be projected on the board, and I do want you to follow this agenda. You have a 45-minute study hall. This was planned for a 45-minute period. Here you go. At any point in time in the video, when you're on different places in the agenda, feel free to pause the video and get started on what I'm asking you to do. Notice that I have put in time marks so you can take a look at the clock or set a timer on your iPad, and I do want you to just spend this much time as you move through the lesson. Okay, so we've got 30 minutes blocked out here, and then you're going to go in and start doing for 15 minutes the work that I teach you to do when I show you the video. So you have no homework, you don't need to write that in the planner. Pause the video now and read your independent reading book silently for 10 minutes. Go ahead and set a timer on your iPad, and when that's done, come back and move on to this part of the video. Okay, now that you're coming back, what we're going to do is move into writing workshop 2, which is going to move away from brainstorming ideas for supporting arguments and counter arguments in your editorial, but actually begin selecting which ones will be the most persuasive for your audience. So I've prepared a handout for you for this workshop, which it looks like this, and your substitute teacher has it. So if you don't have it already, you can get that and follow along with me. In this workshop, the teaching point that I want you to walk away understanding is that an editorial writer will always, always, always keep their audience in mind when they're making decisions about which arguments and counter arguments to include in their piece. They're going to choose the arguments that will be the most persuasive to their audience, even if those aren't the most persuasive to themselves as the writer. I can't emphasize this point enough. You're not trying to convince yourself or people who already think like you. In order to be a great editorial writer, you need to put yourself in the mind of the people who disagree with you. Try to figure out how they think, figure out what they care about, so that you can then come at it from that angle and help convince them why your position should actually be considered. So the first way we're going to start doing that is to do something I'm just going to call a mentor text check-in. And what I want you to do before we can start selecting your arguments and counter arguments, I need you to just take a look at how many should you have. And I'm not going to tell you the answer to that. We've got lots of excellent editorials at our fingertips. So you're going to go look through 4 different editorials. I'm going to tell you which ones I want you to look at. And I want you to ask yourself, how many supporting arguments do the most persuasive editorials usually have? And how many counter arguments are usually refuted in those persuasive editorials? So the ones that I want you to take a look at are some of the ones we've studied as a class. Cell phones should be shut off at school. The other opposite side of that, for students, cell phones and studies don't have to be mutually exclusive. The throwing out trash talk on school sports and uniforms benefit students. So pull those out, have them all out in front of you, those paper copies, and then if you don't have those paper copies, you're just going to have to do the best you can with the ones that you have. And pause the video, read through, and find how many arguments, how many reasons do authors give in the best editorials that you've seen, and how many counter arguments are brought up. So pause the video and come back with that tally. I'm not going to tell you the answer in this video, so go ahead and look, and then come back with your tally. All right, so now that you've done your hunting through those mentor texts and you've got your number of how many supporting arguments you think you should have and how many counter arguments you think you should have, I'm going to move on now to talk about how a writer will decide which ones to keep, because you've hopefully brainstormed more arguments than you actually need in your piece, and same with counter arguments. So here are some criteria that I want you to be thinking about. The first step in choosing your arguments and evidence is to describe your audience. And I'm actually going to have you do this. Just make a list of who these people are. And I don't mean by name, but what do you know about them? What do they value? What's important to them? What do they worry about, do you think? What might be their motivation behind the decisions they're making? I want you to brainstorm as much of that as you can. Really try to get inside their head. Then your second step is going to be to think about this issue that you've chosen to write about and try to step on the other side from yourself and look at this issue from the other side. Consider their position. What do they think or feel about this issue? And more importantly, why do they feel that way? Really try to understand. After you get to that point, that's when you go and you look back at your arguments and you might not have evidence yet, but you go back and look at your arguments and your counter arguments that you've brainstormed, but you look at it through the lens of the people that you're trying to convince. And you ask yourself, which that I have would be the most convincing to my audience based on what I know they believe, what they feel, why they feel that way, what they're concerned about, what they value, which ones are going to be the most convincing to them, and which ones probably wouldn't actually work for them, and get real clear on that. And then finally, you're going to start trimming. You're going to just cross out or move to a different part or delete the least convincing arguments and counter arguments that you've developed so far. And you're going to start chunking the ones that you think will be the most persuasive. And this doesn't always mean the ones you like the best, but the ones that will be most convincing to your audience. And finally, something else you want to think about. Which argument do you think you're going to do the best job writing? That's another factor that you should consider. If there's an argument that you think and believe you have something very powerful to say, and it's going to be the best one you can write, then keep that one. So down below, I've done some brainstorming of my own, and my audience, as you know, is teachers and administrators. So these were some of the things I started to brainstorm about my audience. I know that teaching is something considered a service profession. People who go into teaching are really invested in service to others. Teaching is one of those professions that's called a service profession, so service. I know that teachers care about young people. It might not always seem that way, but you don't go into this job if you don't like kids. Nobody does that. So everybody in this profession does care about young people in their core. I know that teachers value and believe in education. I also know that they genuinely want kids to be successful. We're not in the business of making kids fail. We want kids to do well. I know that administrators and teachers usually work more hours when school is done. When the bell rings and you go home, even if we go home, we're still doing work. I'm doing this right now at 6 o'clock at night at my house. I know that we put ourselves into our work. This job it's not just a job that we do for a paycheck that we don't care about. We really care, and we take it personally. Like we care personally about our work. I also know that we have got to keep evolving with best practices and new information that comes out there in technology. We're constantly, as teachers, demanded of us to change and grow and evolve. And finally, this one down here, and I think this is a real important one, especially for any of you who are writing in your audience as teachers or administrators. We're people who have a lot of critics. We get a lot of feedback from parents, from students, telling us that we could do a better job. We could have done a better job. What we are doing right now is frustrating. It's causing problems. There's a lot of critics for teachers and administrators, and you should keep that in mind if you want to try to convince them to be mindful of the way you're presenting things. So this is an example of me, and you'll notice that I could explain a lot more verbally than what I wrote on the page. I just did this to give you an example. As always, the more detail you can put in now, the stronger the work you're going to do when you're selecting your criteria. So on the sheet, I've given you some space. I've just put 10 blanks. If you need more than 10, by all means, go ahead and do more than 10. But this is the place for you to describe your own audience and think about, as I said up here, who are they? What do you know about them? What do they value? What do they worry about? Why do they feel the way they feel on the issue? So take some time, pause the video, and take some time right now and complete this section down here to the best of your ability. Go. Okay, now that you've come back, I want to show you my last step. I made some decisions based on the work I just did, knowing my audience and thinking through who I'm trying to convince and what their position would be on the issue. I've made some choices in my arguments I'm going to use in my piece and in the counter argument that I'm going to describe and refute. And I've put in bold here the arguments that I'm going to use, and I've put in brackets why I chose them. So you'll remember that one of the things I just said about my audience that I know about them when I was describing them is that they care about young people. And for that reason, I think this argument here, which focuses on how much we will empower students and teach them to become young adults and adults in the world who believe that they have the right to have a voice and to try to affect change if a situation isn't working for them. I don't think educators would be against that. We are always working to teach our kids to advocate for themselves. So I could really play that up because it's something we preach a lot to our students, and this is a chance for us to practice it. I then selected this argument because it's related to us being a service profession, which I mentioned earlier, that we value service to others. That's what teaching is about. So I think I could really connect to that service-minded piece of teachers and say, look, we think of our students like clients in a business. We're here to serve them. And so we really should know what they need and what they want in order to best serve them like our clients. So I think that one will work. And finally, I'm choosing to focus on this argument in my editorial that I'm going to write because I think it really connects to this understanding of my audience that we really want kids to be successful. But I also am picking this one because I think it's the one I can argue the best. I think this is the argument I feel most passionately about. I feel that it just makes common sense that our students should be a part of our evaluation because they see us every day. This just seems so obvious to me. So I'm really ready to write this particular argument. If you come over here, you can see in bold, I've chosen this to be the counter argument that I'm going to refute in my piece. And the simple reason behind it is this is the reason most people who don't agree with me give for why they don't agree with me. They're concerned, what about the kids who just don't like us? Sometimes a teacher and a student don't have a great relationship and they don't feel like that kid should be able to have a voice in their performance evaluation because they don't think a teenager could separate their personal dislike of a teacher from objectively and honestly evaluating the quality of the teaching. And so since that's the one most people who disagree with me think, I have to address it. I have to have the courage to address the criticism that is going to be the hardest for me to refute. It's the one that most teachers are worried about, and I have to have the courage as an editorial writer to address it, or my piece just won't be as persuasive. So now that you've seen me talk you through my decision-making process, stop the video, because this is the end of the video, and I want you to go in and do some real reflection on your own arguments and counter-arguments, and go through the selection process and think about it in some of these same ways. Have fun. I look forward to seeing you in class tomorrow.